Hello, everybody, and welcome. We will start with today's event. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kate Mataravula. My last name is very long, so apologies for that. That's my husband's name that I've taken on, and he's from Fiji. I'm the co-chair of the 2022 Australian Deaf Games, and I am a member of the organising committee. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today for this online event. Unfortunately, we can't meet in person, which is really sad. We don't get to see each other face to face, but hopefully one day there will be another opportunity where we can meet face to face and properly introduce each other. I know many of you are from Newcastle and Lake Macquarie, and it really saddens me. I'm here in Sydney. Unfortunately, we've been in lockdown. My parents and my sister live in the Newcastle region. I know many people from that area, so I was really gutted that I wasn't able to be there today. Today, we have some tech support from Phil Harper. So he will be working with us in the background. He is the General Manager of Deaf Sports Australia, the company that owns the Australian Deaf Games. So he will be with us in spirit, providing technical support throughout the event. We are also supported by two Auslan interpreters. We have Kelly and Katie. So hello to our lovely interpreters. The interpreters today will act as a bridge between Auslan and English. There'll be some presentations today and some presenters who are using signed language, Auslan, and some who are using spoken languages. So you will see both interpreters throughout the event. Just before we get going, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the lands in which we all meet, the custodians of the land. We all come from different areas across Australia, and I do want to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also want to extend my respect and acknowledgement to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander representatives with us today. Also, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to members of the deaf community all throughout Australia, those members who have worked tirelessly to preserve our rich language, culture, and history. So I do pay my respects to all deaf people present today and acknowledge their efforts and all of the work that they have done, raising awareness and improving equality and access for members of the deaf community in Australia. So through Auslan, hopefully we can inspire future leaders based on our deaf elders and the work that they have done for us in the past. So I would like to give a big warm welcome to Destination New South Wales. We have Destination New South Wales representatives. We have Phil Bentham and Amy Payton. So thank you and welcome. Also a big warm welcome to Lady Mayoress from Lake Macquarie City Council, Lady Mayoress Kay Fraser. Welcome and thank you for attending today. We also have the Deputy Mayor, the Deputy Lord Mayor of the City of Newcastle, and that is Declan Clausen. Welcome, Declan. We have three organisations today: Destination New South Wales, Lake Macquarie City Council, and Newcastle City Council. A really, really big thank you for the amount of support and collaboration that you have done and your work to date so far, helping us get to where we are today. We really do thank you and appreciate the support that you have provided thus far. Also, we're lucky to have many, many sponsors for this event and for the Games itself. So a big thank you for your trust and commitment and your belief in the Games. It's invaluable. So I would like to pay my respects and thank Deaf Society and Deaf Services, the West Group Australia, AI Media, Newcastle Airport, BioRevive, Sanitarium, Hearing Australia, Port Waratah Coal Services, and Hunter Water. Thank you. I'm really pleased with the progress that we have made with the Games so far. There's been a lot of work involved. It's been very exciting times, and we are looking forward to very successful Australian Deaf Games. We've had to navigate some turbulent waters to get to where we are today. We have a rough social program already outlined. We have the events outlined. Online registrations are open for everyone to make those registrations. We've had a lot of volunteers already. They're able, they're willing to get started. So far we've made so many strides, and we're progressing very well and looking forward to a fruitful Games. So thanks to your support, we've been able to get to where we are today. Your support is invaluable, so thank you for your faith and commitment in us and the Deaf Games. We're looking forward to a beautiful event in 2022. So now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Jamie Howell. Jamie's only 23, currently living and working in Brisbane. She works as an Auslan language support officer for deaf and hard of hearing children. She also supports their families and staff members within that school setting. Hi, Jamie, welcome. Jamie has a Bachelor of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences from the University of Queensland, and she will start further study next year in a Masters of Learning and Education for primary aged children. So yes, good luck, Jamie. You've given all of us a lot of hope, and I know you're working towards becoming a teacher of the deaf in the future, which is fantastic. She has competed internationally, nationally at a competitive level, and is a highly accomplished presenter, highly accomplished sports person. Sorry, one second. Sorry, the interpreter just lost Kate for a second there. So Jamie is the Australian deaf female long jump champion. She's a record holder. She has represented Australia in the Asia Pacific Deaf Games in 2015, plus the Deaf Olympics in 2017. And many, many international events, unfortunately, have been cancelled due to the pandemic. But she's currently competing in an AFL women's competition and a member of our sporting community for the ADG in 2022. So welcome, Jamie, and I will hand over to you for your presentation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie. I'm 23 years old. I was born with a profound bilateral hearing loss, so I have no hearing whatsoever in both ears. I wouldn't hear a helicopter if it landed right beside me. I received a cochlear implant when I was 19 months old, and that has allowed me to access sound and speech. So now I use both Auslan and spoken English to communicate. Growing up, I was the only deaf in my family. My whole family's hearing. I also went to a mainstream school, and I was the only deaf student in my school. So I grew up in a predominantly hearing world, and I only really started getting involved in the deaf community a little bit later in life. So now I'm currently working as an Auslan language model. I work with deaf and hard of hearing children and their families. And I was studying part-time. I graduated in July, so very recently, completed my Bachelor of Exercise Nutrition Sciences. And like Kate said, I will be studying a Master's next year to become a primary school teacher of the deaf. But work, study, I love all of that, but my passion has always been sport. I was always an active kid growing up, heavily involved in sport. I played a wide variety of sports. And it was when I was about 9 that my parents sort of saw, got some natural talent. So they signed me up for athletics. And when I was 10, I started competing at a high level in school sport as a mainstream and para athlete. So I would often go to districts, Eastern states, able-bodied, and then I would go on to nationals as a para athlete. And yeah, my first year of school sport, I went to nationals for cross country, and I went to the Pacific School Games for swimming and athletics. And at that competition, I won 4 gold medals and broke my first Australian deaf women's long jump record. So that competition is really what started my journey to becoming an international deaf athlete. And around the same time, I also started getting involved in deaf camps and deaf sports days. And I went to my first Australian Deaf Games when I was 13 in 2012 in Geelong. And it was just an incredible experience for me, because back then I wasn't heavily involved in the deaf community. I hadn't met many other deaf people. And so I just absolutely loved being able to meet other deaf from all over Australia and just building those instant connections and relationships. So I continue to participate in every Australian Deaf Games since. So next year will actually be my 4th Australian Deaf Games, and I'm only 23, so I'm sure I've got many more to come. So yeah, school sport and the Australian Deaf Games really went me on my journey, and my first international competition was the Asia Pacific Deaf Games in Taiwan in 2015. I was 17 and in year 12, and the competition was actually the same week as my school formal. So luckily the athletics competition finished the day before, so I was able to, I literally got my nails done for my formal in Taiwan, jumped in an 8-hour flight home, arrived home, straight home, got my hair, makeup done, and went straight to my formal. It did mean that I unfortunately missed out on the closing ceremony, but I think my year 12 formal was super important to me. But the Asia Pacific Deaf Games was also important, so I'm just really glad I got to do both. So yeah, Asia Pacific Deaf Games was my first international competition, my first time representing Australia. It was my first time meeting deaf people from all over the world. And because I was so young, I went with very low expectations. I just wanted to use it to gain experience and prepare for the Deaf Olympics. So I actually surprised myself and competed pretty well. I ended up winning gold in the long jump, silver in the 200 meters, and bronze in the 200. So I got the 3 medals, gold, silver, and bronze. And then my next international competition was the Deaf Olympics in 2017. And that was huge because that was the reason I was training so hard to go to the Deaf Olympics. So to finally achieve that was just amazing. I competed in the long jump and the 200 meters. Unfortunately, my lead up to the games was a little bit rocky because I had bursitis in my jumping foot. So basically the foot that I take off with, I had injured. So I wasn't able to train for a couple of weeks. And then just before leaving, I got a cortisone injection. So my first proper training session in a few weeks was actually in Turkey the week before I was due to compete. So despite the lead up and the preparation, I do think that I competed to the best of my ability on the day. And I did end up finishing 9th in long jump, which isn't too bad. I just missed out on top 8 and it came down to the final jumper. So that was a bit devastating. So I was actually in the top 8 and then the final jumper just jumped slightly further than me to knock me out. So I was gutted, but I think the results didn't matter because the overall experience was just amazing. And my favorite part was just meeting other deaf athletes from all over the world. And obviously each country has its own sign language. So how did we communicate? Well, I had to learn a little bit of international sign language. And I remember at the start of the week, I was clueless. I could not communicate with anybody. I had no idea how. But then by the end of the week, I was able to have a full conversation with athletes from Brazil, Japan, Germany. So that was just incredible. I just loved that part of the experience. But yeah, that pretty much summarizes my overseas experiences in athletics. I did have plans to do more international competitions. I had qualified for the 2019 Asia Pacific Deaf Games in Hong Kong. Unfortunately, they were cancelled due to protesting that was happening at the time. And I also qualified for the World Deaf Athletics Championships in Poland last year, which unfortunately were cancelled due to this thing called COVID. So I'm yet to tick off our World Championships, and that is something that I would really like to achieve one day. I was also training hard for the next Deaf Olympics, which were supposed to be this year. I'm not sure when they will be happening. So I think I just felt like I got to a point where I wasn't training for anything. I had achieved everything I wanted to achieve on a national level, and international competitions just weren't happening. So I decided to just take a break from athletics and enjoy playing other sports for a change. So now I currently play AFL, and I play in the Queensland AFL Women's Competition, so the top competition in Queensland, and I absolutely love it. It's new, it's exciting, it's fun, it gives me something else to focus on. And last year was actually my first season of footy ever. I had played one competition, deaf competition in Melbourne, and I absolutely loved it. And I really wanted to join a hearing club, but I was very reluctant to do so just due to communication barriers. In the past, I have played team sports, but it's always been a deaf competition, or it's been through school where it's been with a group of people that I know very well. So the communication was easy. However, joining a hearing club of 60 girls I was so nervous. I just didn't know if they were going to adapt to my communication needs. But I honestly had nothing to worry about. The girls have been incredible. They've been supportive. They've made sure I felt included. They've adapted their communication styles, and they went above and beyond to actually learn our team song in Auslan, so I could join in post-game celebrations. Because prior to that, I had no idea what the team song was. I would just jump up and down and pretend I knew what the words were. So when they signed it, I was like, now I know, and I can actually join in. And that just made me feel so special and like I was part of this club. And someone had filmed it because they surprised me. I had no idea they were going to do it. Someone filmed it, filmed my reaction, posted this video on social media, and it just went viral. But it created so many incredible opportunities to just create deaf awareness and promote the importance of inclusion in sports. And it also led to me being named the AFLW Cup Ambassador for 2021, which meant I was flown to Adelaide for the grand final between Adelaide Crows and Brisbane Lions. And I got to present the cup to the winning team, which was a very cool experience. So yeah, aside from AFL, I've been playing touch for a few years. I play in local competitions, and I'm also heavily involved in deaf sporting events. And yeah, the Australian Deaf Games next year, I plan to do touch football, netball, and also get involved in the CrossFit demonstration, which I believe is happening for the first time ever. So that's pretty exciting. And yeah, that's basically all about me.
Thank you, Jamie. Wow, your journey is fascinating. You've done a lot, you've accomplished a lot, competing at different levels. And I was just thinking, what I like as part of my work is that, you know, seeing the end result and knowing what people are working towards. Unfortunately, you've had to have a few international events cancelled on you. That's pretty difficult. How have you maintained your motivation and passion throughout that period? It must have been hard.
Yeah, it was definitely challenging, and yeah, I think that was part of the reason I decided to just take a break from athletics and I had been doing athletics for, like 13, 14 years. And I think it was just time for me to just take a break, try something new. I had always wanted to try AFL. So I just thought, look, this is the perfect opportunity to try something different. And I'm so glad I did, because it's just been fantastic.
Yeah, it's all worked out well, hasn't it? I would like to ask the audience now if anybody watching online has any questions for Jamie. If you do, please pop in now. Either use your microphone function, or you can turn your video on, or you can type your question into the chat function. Thank you for that.
Jamie, it's Gary.
Oh, there
Jamie,
we go. We do have a question.
It's Gary Westbale. Hi, hope you are well and well done. What barriers, Jamie, have you had to overcome in your sport and work life careers?
Yeah, so in my work environment, I'm very lucky to work in an environment that has deaf awareness. Half of our staff here are deaf themselves, so I don't really have any barriers or issues at work, which I'm very grateful for. In sport, I have always stuck to individual sports for a reason, because you don't have to communicate with anybody. So team sports was always a big barrier for me, especially on the field, because when I'm on the field, I can't hear anything at all. There's just too much noise, and there's people, yelling at you from all different directions. I just can't hear anything. And in AFL, I also wear headgear, which covers my speech processor, so that muffles the sound. So I basically can't hear anything at all. So to get over those barriers with communication on the field, I just make sure that I tell my coaches some strategies, how they can adapt to suit my communication style. I also have a talk to my team, like at the start of every season. We get the whole team together, and I basically just introduce myself, who I am. Hey, I'm deaf. This is what you can do to help me. So at footy, we just do a lot of gesturing and pointing on the field, and everyone's just aware that I may not be able to hear them. So they've got to find another way to let me know what's going on. So yeah, I think it's just to get over these barriers in sport, it's just making sure you communicate your needs and you really do advocate for yourself, because if you're not going to say anything, they're not going to change, are they? So yeah, that's probably the main barrier I face is communication on the field. Yeah.
Thanks, Jamie.
Great. Jamie, there's one question from Lauren. Who are your role models? Is there someone that you look up to?
Oh, that's a good question. I honestly think my role model just changes like every week, every month, every year. Like there'll be a new person that I see that I'm like, oh, they're so inspiring. And then I'll look up to them. And then, then someone else comes along and I'm like, oh, you're my new role model. So I've never actually had one role model. I've had many role models. And I think that's always a good thing to have, because then you get lots of different examples and perspectives of how you should do things, and you can sort of pick out all the best characteristics from each person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on the area or what part of life journey you're going through. You get something from a little bit of something from everyone. So thank you. But thank you, Jamie. Thank you for your time. It's been really, really interesting listening to your story today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now I would like to introduce CindyLu. This is CindyLu Bailey. CindyLu Bailey OAM, one of our co-patrons for the next 2022 Deaf Games. CindyLu is a former swimmer. She has finished representing Australia both at a Commonwealth level and through the Deaf Olympics. CindyLu, hello, here she is now.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, Cindy. CindyLu represented Australia at 2 Commonwealth Games, 1982 and 1986, plus 2 Pan-Pacific Games, plus 6 Deaf Olympics. This spans over her 20-year history, from 1987 to oh God, I can't even say, it makes me feel too old, Cindy.
That's right. Perfect.
So at an Australian level, Cindy has won both the 100 metre and 200 metre breaststroke, both in 1981 and 1982 and 1986. In 83, she won the 200 metre breaststroke at an Australian level. The Deaf Olympics, she dominated the pool. She won the 100 and the 200 metre breaststroke, and at 5 consecutive Deaf Olympic Games, from 81 right up until her retirement in 97, which is an amazing accomplishment, Cindy.
Thank you.
She has her own Wikipedia page where you can see all of those accomplishments listed. So altogether, CindyLu has won 19 gold medals, 4 silver and 5 bronze medals. She broke 18 Deaf Olympic records, totaling 29 medals in her medal count, which is the 3rd highest for any Deaf Olympic athlete, which is just amazing, Cindy. CindyLu, I'm just wondering, how did you get involved in swimming? How did it all start for you, or where did that passion or drive for sport come from?
For me, it happened throughout school. I loved being a part of lots of different sports, but there was one school swimming carnival. So I thought, why not have a go? It's not something that comes from my family background, swimming, but I jumped in to the swimming pool that day, and there just happened to be a coach there who saw me swimming. They didn't know that I was deaf, but somehow this coach got into contact with my mother and asked whether she'd like to try having me join a swimming club. So at the time I was about 11 and a half, 12. And Mum said, okay, why not? See if she likes this swimming club. So I went along, and I had just naturally assumed that the other kids would be deaf, but they weren't. They were all hearing. So Mum stood and signed to me, because at that time I was quite oral. I relied on lip reading as well. So Mum would gesture to support me. And I was in the pool as part of this club for 6 weeks. And from there, my skills of swimming just grew so much. So I was in 1977, I was 17 years old, and I was chosen to go to the Deaf Olympics, and I came home with a gold medal.
Wow. So
I'm really grateful to that coach.
So your main swimming event was breaststroke, and how did you pick breaststroke?
Well, at that time I was 12 and I was doing freestyle and breaststroke, backstroke. I hated butterfly, but yeah, mainly freestyle and breaststroke. My coach would watch my technique, and he saw that I just had a better aptitude for breaststroke, and that's how this decision was made.
And what about hearing aids? Did you wear hearing aids growing up?
Oh, I had, that really old fashioned hearing aid with the box on the front of the chest, but obviously I couldn't have that in the hearing pool. So
yeah, you couldn't use that.
So I had to rely on visual communications from the coach. Normally the coach would show the movements for the arms as a visual instruction, but when he spoke, I just wasn't understanding it. Yeah.
Wow. That's like, you just got where you are through perseverance with limited communication.
Yeah, it was certainly a barrier, the communication aspect of it. Over the years, I have spent many an hour in the swimming pool lip reading the coach, or I'd ask the other swimmers in the lanes next to me what was being said. and I'd just follow along with the pack and try my best, try to achieve what I needed to achieve through training.
Wow. Lip reading is tiring. I can imagine what that must have been like. I'm wondering, do you prefer competing at an Australian level, an international level, an Olympic level? Do you have any preference or favorites there?
No, I don't really have a preference for which level. I just love competing. Whether it's a national hearing competition or a deaf competition or an international stage, I love it all. I love swimming. For the hearing competitions, whether national, state or overseas, there's more of a barrier that's present there in terms of communication, because I didn't have any interpreters available to me at the time, and I just have to follow along with what everyone else was doing. But at the same time, the swimming trainer had a whiteboard, so I'd be able to read what they put up on the whiteboard, which was okay. But I'll never forget the frustration that communication barrier brought. Looking back, I always think, what if I had an interpreter? I wonder how that would have impacted on my swimming ability. And of course, it's something I'll never be able to answer. Then when I think about Deaf Olympics, no problem there whatsoever with the communication. Just like what Jamie was saying, you use visual communication, mime and gesture with competitors from overseas. The swimming itself, the swimming comps though, in terms of the competition aspect, it's all the same. So I don't have a key preference.
So do you think communication is the number one barrier? Did you come across any other barriers that you had to overcome in your swimming career?
I had to persevere with lip reading to overcome the barrier, or I would get people to write it down. I didn't have great English reading skills from school. I did a lot of work one-on-one. Looking back, the meetings were always in a group setting and not one-on-one. So I'd always have to plead with someone to tell me what was said before. There was a lot of videos without captions, which caused a great number of my frustrations. So we're watching a lot of videos about swimming technique, and I just have to look at their body and see what I could pick up visually. I tried to catch as much as I could.
Wow. I'm wondering, this might sound like a dumb question. I'm not that interested, or I'm not very good at sports. I don't compete myself. So
That's
when
right.
you start a race, just forgive my ignorance, but how do you even do that? How do you adjust if you can't hear the starting gun? I'm just wondering how that all works for you.
Well, when I was 12, I started getting involved with hearing competitions, and that's when we addressed that with the coach of how I would hear the starting pistol. And we came up with a strategy of watching the other swimmers. At the time, luckily you were allowed 3 false starts, whereas now it's just 1 and out. But back in my time, we did have an allowance for 3. And it was a bit like watching the swimmer next to me. And if they twitched a little bit, then they could then get me to dive in and I'd be out. And it did happen once. So it took years of training to work out the best strategy. And what we came up with is one of the girls on either side of me, I'd look at their calf muscle. So when they went to put pressure down on their toes, their calf muscle would twitch before they dived into the pool. So I'd look for that muscle movement and then I would take my dive. Sometimes that did create a couple of false starts, but yeah, that was the strategy that we used. In the end, I was always slightly delayed. I was always behind, but that seemed to be the best way, looking at that calf twitch.
That's incredible. And what about the differences when competing at the Deaf Olympics?
They use a white flag there. Now I see that they've got the technology to use a flashing light, and I so wish that they had that in my time.
Shame.
But we can't go back and change it.
Yeah, if only you were born again into the current generation.
True.
So if there are any young aspiring athletes out there that want to become swimmers, do you have any advice for them? What would you say to them?
My advice would be, please try any sports that you like. try lots of different ones. And if you feel particularly passionate about one, go for it. Try and get into the Australian Deaf Games. Try and get in for any sport category. And then you'll find your way from there, and you'll be able to make whatever changes you need to suit the sport. Just have a go.
Thank you, Cindy. And are you going to be competing in the 2022 Australian Deaf Games, or you're out?
I don't think so. But if there was a Swimmers Masters program, I might be interested in doing that. Win some points for New South Wales.
Awesome. That's good. You're supporting New South Wales. Good job. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I'd like to ask for any questions from the floor now, if anyone has any questions for Cindy. Okay, great. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you. So next, I would like to introduce Katie Kelly, OAM. Katie is also our second of our co-patron for the Australian Deaf Games 2022. Welcome, Katie. She's got a lovely background there of the Newcastle beach. Beautiful. Is it? Is it Merriweather? Yeah, beautiful. Love Merriweather Beach. Katie is a two-time Paralympian champion. So this was Rio 2016 and Tokyo 2020, which was just recently. And two times world champion. She's won at the first woman to win the para triathlete gold medal in 2016 in Rio, which was very exciting. That was within the vision impaired sector. She also won 2 world championships as the first female para triathlete to win the triathlon and an Australian Female Athlete of the Year award recipient. Katie's proudest achievement is the director of the Sports Access Foundation and establishing that foundation. This is an organisation that provides grants to Australian children living with disabilities. She's also an ambassador for Next Sense, which used to be the Royal Institute for Deaf and Blind Children, currently named Next Sense. She's also an ambassador for the Inclusion Alliance and Inclusion Solutions. Her sporting career ended in Tokyo. She is now working for Blue Scope in the Social Impact and Inclusion team. Thank you for joining us today, Katie. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and it's so wonderful to be here. I first like to acknowledge the country that I come from is the Yugambeh country of Gold Coast, beautiful Gold Coast. And it's a really warm welcome to our special guests here today, and to Mayor Kay Fraser. It's lovely to see you from Lake Macquarie, a place I know well, and I spent time there at the Central Coast Triathlon Club when I lived around the Hunter area. Welcome to Deputy Mayor Declan Auslan. It's great to see you here today in Newcastle. Just to acknowledge both of you and your respective council for your involvement in the Australian Deaf Games for the 22, and to acknowledge Destination New South Wales and Bill and Amy. And I do that too on behalf of CindyLu. Both of us are the co-patrons of the game. I have to say it's a wonderful, tremendous honour to be a co-patron of the Australian Deaf Games, now in its 19th game. And it's wonderful that it'll be held in Newcastle and Lake Macquarie. Also to acknowledge the corporate partners here today, and to some that are close to me that I've been involved with in the past is West Group, when I worked at Newcastle Knights and Jets. So it's wonderful to see you involved, and also SWS Lawyers and Richie Souters, who's been a wonderful advocate for myself and for parasport and investing in Newcastle. And it's great to see SWS Lawyers behind the Australian Deaf Games. So as a brief introduction, I grew up in Casino on the Northern Rivers, and I was diagnosed with a profound hearing loss at the age of 5. I'm very grateful I had an integrated education, and I went on to do studied in sports and marketing later life. So I've been wearing hearing aids since 5 when they first picked up on it, and I had a lot of catch up to do with speech therapy. I hated my hearing aids. CindyLu described how she had the clunky extra part that you had to hold on to. I used to throw mine in the fire. Mum and Dad would be like, Katie's throwing her hearing aids out again. Thankfully, you know, I'm not doing that anymore, but I guess what I wanted to say was it took me some time to accept it, and also, like I guess many children and Jamie described, you don't want to be different, you want to be included. And it points to why the Australian Deaf Games is such an important event to raise awareness for the community, to see this beautiful, rich community, which is so broad and diverse on its own. You've seen Jamie and CindyLu both sign, whereas I'm hearing and I lip read. And so within our community, it's diverse and rich. And in terms of how I became involved in the deaf sports community, in my mid-20s, I was doing different pro bono jobs, and one of them was media officer for the Australian Deaf Olympic team. So Melbourne hosted the 2005 Deaf Olympics, and that was my first time I really represented Australia, although I was a media officer, not an athlete. And I never forget walking out on Olympic Park in Melbourne, surrounded by over 250, 300 Australian deaf and hard of hearing athletes, all signing, so excited. We all had our Australian uniform on and wearing the emblem. And it was such a proud moment. I was so privileged to be involved in that. And that's on a number of fronts. One, obviously to represent Australia, you know, be part of that team. But 2, to see this beautiful community to come together, because we all have a sense of what it feels like to be on the outside. It's when you don't hear well, you're really struggling all the time to pick up what's going on. And so you can feel isolated, you can feel a bit removed. And we know there are real challenges in the deaf community with mental well-being and self-esteem, particularly with our kids. So being able to be part of the Deaf Olympics and everybody there understands what it's like and what the challenges are, but also for the deaf themselves, their culture is so strong and important, and that opportunity to come together. So that for me, you know, it was a great moment to be part of the Deaf Olympic team. And then years on, my eyesight was deteriorating, and they eventually confirmed the reason for my hearing loss was I have a deaf-blind condition called Usher syndrome. So my vision is getting very tunneled and my hearing has gotten worse. I'm now profound to severe. So thankfully, hearing aid technology enables me to hear well. So the irony of losing my eyesight was that it meant I was blind enough to go to the Paralympics and compete in para-triathlon as a vision-impaired athlete. So I feel that that's been another journey on itself. And I recently went to Tokyo, and at the age of 46, I'm officially retired. But it's amazing when you listen to CindyLu, and CindyLu, incredible, you know, I think, what was it, 6 Deaf Olympics that you went to, incredible success that you had, and also Jamie's success. I love being around strong women that empower me, inspire me to do better. So finished Tokyo and my para triathlon career, and I'm now very much in the space of advocacy in diversity and inclusion. So I'll just touch on one thing. As somebody who's been in the corporate world, and many of our sponsors here today, thank you again for coming along and being a part of this, I think that you're also involved because you want to understand more and you want to make your own corporate world, spaces, community and groups more inclusive. And it's great that you are supporting our event, because you will learn and meet a whole rich and diverse community, being the deaf and hard of hearing. So someone in the corporate world, I never wanted my employers to know I had a hearing loss. I was worried that I'd be perceived differently. I had this notion of being deaf and dumb, and I've heard people still use that language. So I would never tell my potential employer that I had a hearing loss, although they would pick it up with my speech and so on. I didn't want to be seen different, and I wanted to be judged on merit. But thankfully now, more and more as we have these conversations, people like myself and young Jamies, as they go into the corporate world, they can talk about their challenges. I don't really like the word disability, more your challenges, and have open conversations about, okay, we're the Newcastle City Council, how can we be more inclusive? What support do you need from us? Or we're SWS lawyers, we have a hard of hearing young lawyer coming through our program. What do we need to do to support them? So now, of course, I'm very more open and comfortable with my challenges that I've had with vision and hearing loss, and I'm very proud to represent both communities. And so I wanted to finish off with a couple of things. Was, again, thank you to all of you for being involved, to acknowledge those before us that set these games up, that gave the deaf and hard of hearing people an opportunity to come together to celebrate. Because the Australian Deaf Games is more about, as you would know, it's more than a sport like the Olympics and Paralympics. It's about humanity, it's about hope, it's celebration. And this is such a wonderful opportunity for the Hunter region to showcase their cities and the two respective councils for all your facilities, the great access that you provide for all your community. And I know that your communities are going to be enriched for their involvement in these games. So I can't wait to see you all next year on the 16th of April 22. And I want to finish off also by acknowledging the late Leonie Jackson, our former chair, who passed away. We lost her in January this year. I didn't get to meet Leonie personally. We had meetings, but the work that she did for the deaf community throughout her whole life, it certainly left me feeling I need to do more. So these games will be very much in honour of her, and her contribution will never be forgotten. So thank you all. It's wonderful to meet you all, and can't wait to see you all in person next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. There is going to be a Community Spirit Award in recognition of Leonie and her work that she's done with the community, and especially her involvement with the Deaf Games. So yes, it's lovely that you've acknowledged her as well, but there will be a formal acknowledgement at the events as well. I want to open up to the audience now. Are there any questions for Katie? If I can make a quick comment though, because Katie, you reminded me actually, we have a similar upbringing. So I grew up in the hearing community, and I didn't meet another deaf person really until I was learning Auslan much later in my childhood. So deafhood and the journey of deafhood, it can be a long journey. Often it's an identity issue where you have to teach yourself almost how to be deaf. That can be really hard to do that on your own without other deaf role models or other deaf people around you. So it's a huge step for someone like yourself going to the Deaf Games, meeting other deaf people and really being opened up to that world. It can be eye-opening for many athletes, the journey of deafhood, I think. So yeah, I can recommend a good book actually. It's called The Shepherd of Sound. It's a fantastic book, and there's a really, really good explanation of deafhood. Sorry, I've digressed a little there, but your journey's just reminded me of everyone's journey through deafhood. So I need to wrap up the event now, but thank you so much, Katie. So I would like to thank Jamie, CindyLu, and Katie for sharing your experience and your stories with us today, and just showing us the value and the importance of the Deaf Games, not only for the athletes, but for the deaf community and for the wider community as well. So thank you for everyone who's watching online. I look forward to meeting you and seeing you in person at the Deaf Games in Newcastle in April 2022. It's my favourite spot to swim, at the Bogey Hole in Newcastle. Unfortunately, there are no events there, but I might go for a quick dip if I can duck out on one of my breaks for a quick swim. So my husband is a mad rugby fan. So he's going to be in the 7-a-side team. So I will be at the Deaf Games as a participant and a member of the organising committee. I'll be at the beaches, and I really look forward to the beach volleyball and so many different events. And I really look forward to seeing you all there. Now, if I can ask everyone to turn their videos on, just so we can have a quick hello and a quick connection before we close off today's event. There we all are. Nice to see you all, and thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.